Okay, well, we'll call this meeting to order. As y'all know, we have the bill, House Bill 131 and gross ballot drop boxes prohibition. We, uh, we heard about this bill on Friday. We left a few people off of being able to testify. So my intention would be to allow those people to testify that didn't testify on Friday. Do we have any online?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, hold on one second. We have on Friday,
I've got the list, but
let me grab it. Jason Sneed from Alexandria, Virginia.
right, we didn't take anybody from out of state, so we could let him in and hear from him.
And then Phyllis Roseberry. And he's new, right?
She's not on my list, but that's okay.
Right, and we'll give you a new list in just 1 second.
No worries. Well, let's get started. Get somebody in.
So the first one is Jason. Jason, are you online?
Mr. Sneed,
Yes, ma'am, I am. It says I can't enable the video though.
I think it's from your side, but we'll grab an IT person, but go ahead.
can you go without the video, Mr. Sneed, for now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Chairman Case, I will proceed. Thank you.
You bet.
It's good to be able to join you. Apologies for the video difficulty here. My name is Jason Sneed. I am the executive director of Honest Elections Project Action. We are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting election integrity. I'm glad to be able to share my support for HB 131, which is a common sense bill to clarify that Wyoming law does not permit the use of unattended and unsecured drop boxes. Unstaffed drop boxes are a uniquely insecure method of returning a ballot. We heard a lot of testimony last week in this committee about boxes and in various ways in which they are abused. I do not believe, even though we heard some testimony that seemed to indicate that they were not being abused in Wyoming, that we should confuse good fortune with best practices. And in my organization's opinion, the best practice here would be to eliminate unattended drop boxes. You heard last week about some of the various inflammatory incidents last year in the news with fire bombings and other acts of vandalism targeting drop boxes. Unstaffed drop boxes simply present targets of opportunity for individuals that are determined to commit malicious acts. We also see these boxes are clear targets of opportunities for individuals who wish to engage in targeted vote harvesting, particularly when those boxes are accessible outside routine business hours. In 2023, individuals working for the incumbent mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut, illegally harvested ballots and stuffed them into unattended drop boxes in full view of security cameras. Simply put, it is far easier to illegally deposit ballots when nobody is present to ask questions, and that is doubly true if you can do so at 2 a.m. Security cameras and other forms of passive security, including bolting a box to the ground, are simply not sufficient. Cameras are no substitute for a person. It's akin to imagining if your bank fired all of its security guard and staff and trusted cameras alone to deter a robbery. I doubt many people would entirely trust that decision, and yet that is essentially the security de facto norm in the realm of drop boxes. Surveillance alone cannot halt or deter an individual who is determined to commit an act of fraud or vandalism. And speaking of fraud, if illegal vote harvesting does occur and illegally cast or collected ballots are deposited in an unattended drop box, it is almost impossible to discern which are the affected ballots and which are not. Some retort that a vote harvester can always stuff ballots into a mailbox instead, but dozens or hundreds of ballots that suddenly appear in a mailbox are an immediate red flag. In a drop box, it's simply a sign of good turnout. And finally, the lack of clarity on drop boxes mean that some counties in Wyoming have offered them while others have not. That, in essence, creates unequal opportunities for individuals to vote based on where they live. and also risks creating a race to the bottom in the sense that counties wishing to even the playing field have no choice but to also offer unsecured, unstaffed drop boxes. With all respect to the clerks, this is a decision that rests with you as the legislature of this state. It would be far better for the state to set a clear rule that drop boxes are not permissible under state law. Compliance with best practices and state law should not be discretionary. 12 states have already banned the use of drop boxes. HB 131 will ensure that Wyoming law is clear and consistently applied. I encourage you to advance this measure and ensure that everyone who casts a vote in Wyoming can trust that his or her vote will be counted. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Mr. Sneed? No questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Who's next?
The other two who had signed up now are not in attendance, so that's it on 131.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience that we didn't get last time? That didn't have an opportunity last time? Hello, Mr. Corinthy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Joey Correnti, I'm the Executive Director of Rural Wyoming Matters. We are an informational educational advocacy group out of rural Wyoming across the state. On and for the bill. I know you prefer pragmatism to passion, so the bottom line is we've heard a lot of things, and my real concern is the fact that these are all secured by video cameras. Video cameras are only good for prosecution if identification can be made. Whatever possible scenario could come up, it's difficult to identify the people who have voted, the ballots that were actually in the box at the time, and my biggest concern, again, is being able to do something about it. And the only thing we can do is it's not proactive, it's reactive. It's looking at a video saying, okay. I think my biggest problem with the drop boxes is that it doesn't provide equal opportunity for the residents of rural Wyoming. It favors the people that live in or visit the county seat the most. It's not convenient for everybody. I still have voters that have to drive over 200 miles to get to the county courthouse to use the drop box. So with those concerns, I don't see a problem with the drop boxes going away. I don't see a problem with the drop boxes inside the courthouse, the clerk's office not being there, as long as an individual, based on the language of the bill, has to place that ballot in the hand of a clerk or the clerk's staff. My problem with boxes inside the clerk's office is that could get commingled with other things. It could get missed. It could get stuck to the back of something that needs to go to the treasurer instead of the clerk. And it would really have to be hand ballots to a clerk so they know it's ballots. It's going into the secure box and being prepared for the absentee ballot pre-processing. I spent quite a few years as a canvassing board member in Carbon County. So all these concerns about ballot harvesting and stuffing of ballot boxes, I don't have, because I know intimately the processes of identifying what ballots are coming in, where they came from. And in order for someone to really get a bunch of ballots that aren't legitimate and stuff them in there, another crime has to occur, another crime that's probably also not being prosecuted. So my real concern here is, do we have the chain of custody and the security, and hopefully, as an interim topic, maybe take up a way to expand that to include the rural areas. So on and for, I think this is a small step forward in a much bigger problem, and heard a lot of stories from a lot of sides, things I haven't seen in my time working elections here in Wyoming. I don't think it's going to put that much hurt on voter turnout, voter participation. And of course, it's only one step in things we can build on in the future, which might include expanding that to the municipalities and the clerks there to accept ballots. But that's a different topic. I think as it stands, with a few minor changes, this bill is good to go. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Corinthy? Not saying any. Thank you, sir. Lily, I'm wondering where Senator Landon is. If he was in the Senate chamber, I wonder if he was thinking that it's 7:30 and not 7. I just wonder if that's possible. Yeah, would one of you please text him? Feel like I actually left my phone behind. So within the audience, who else hasn't testified before? Yes, please come forward.
Mr. Chairperson, I am representing the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. I'm not here to oppose or support this bill, but I do want to say
Yeah, you have to say your name, Linda.
oh, my name is Linda Burt, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say that the drop boxes are a very important part of voting for victims and survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault. Some of these people cannot receive mail at their homes safely. Some of them don't feel like they can go out to public places safely, especially in areas where they would obviously have to stand in line, that kind of thing. So this is both convenient and secure for domestic violence victims. It's something that's important in terms of them being able to vote and feel safe as they do vote with the ballot boxes. So
Questions?
any questions?
Questions for Ms. Byrd? Thank you, Ms. Byrd.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience that didn't testify last Friday or before today? Did we picked up anybody online? Let's hear from Ms. Roseberry. What do you think that noise is? No, it's no.
Yeah.
That's a new noise.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good morning. It says my video has been disabled by the host. So I don't know why.
Can we work around it? We're trying to figure that out on our end too, and I don't have an answer for you. So would you mind testifying without the video?
Sure, no problem. I was just, I'm glad you can't see me this early. Okay, this is Phyllis Roseberry. I live or my husband and I and our family, we've lived on a small ranch outside of Worland, in Wyoming for over 40 years. Love Wyoming. So, I'm testifying today because I'm for the bill. No, I'm sorry. I'm against the bill. I would like to keep the drop boxes. I have several reasons. One is there's really been never shown to be any fraud in Wyoming. In fact, the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, lists only 4 instances of voter fraud in Wyoming since 2000. And those were the result of people with criminal convictions trying to vote. So we really don't have any fraud in Wyoming. The county clerks have stated repeatedly that ballot drop boxes are safe and secure. I know you've heard all that. They have cameras and there's only one key. The county clerk has it. And also Ed Buchanan, the previous Secretary of State, who's now a judge, has said repeatedly they're safe. So ballot boxes make voting easier for the elderly, the handicapped, people working multiple jobs, people living far out in rural areas can't make it on time to either election day or when the county clerks are open. And these are people who would want to vote, but would have great difficulty making it to the polls, like I say, within the time frame. So this bill would disenfranchise many of these voters. So my view is, as representatives of our representative democracy, which you guys are, it should be your duty, it seems to me, to make voting easier when it is already safe and secure. So my position is to keep the ballot boxes because it enfranchises more voters. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Roseberry. We appreciate it. Let's see if there's any questions. Any questions for Ms. Roseberry? We're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else online? Sorry, I know you guys are working on, you got a 2-for-track going over there.
That's it on this.
Okay. Anybody in the audience that hasn't testified before? Anybody in the audience? Hello.
Oh, you go ahead, we'll go up here some more, ready?
Morning, Chairman.
I
and
don't think that's
members.
working. You got a green light? Pull it
Hello,
close.
hello.
Real close.
Wow, okay. Good morning, Chairman, members. I'm Arlene Brady. I am going to be speaking in a moment about another bill, but I just did want to say that I do not agree with drop boxes, and I would like to see them removed and have uniformity across the state. So I'm opposed of drop boxes. Thank you.
And you're a
question?
representative? Thank you. Any questions for Representative Brady? Thank you. Yes, sir, you're up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mark Cap, Crook County. I live in Sundance, Wyoming. I'm against drop boxes, and I've watched the testimony that's occurred both in the House hearing and in this hearing. And it's troubling. The clerks are making up their own rules right now. They're capturing people's faces and license plates as they're dropping off ballots. There's nothing more scary than that. You don't walk in and vote and take a picture of your face. You had a clerk testify that she's accessing those videos on her personal cell phone outside of office hours. What's scary about that is there's no legislation around that. There's no rules. And I think you want to take those rules back, and you have a bill in front of you to get rid of the drop boxes, and I encourage you to move that through the Senate. Stand for questions. Thank you.
And thank you. And your last name again, sir?
Kep.
We've been through this before, and I am so sorry. I know that I've got a brain block on this. Questions for Mr. Kep? Thank you, sir, very much. Anybody else? Anybody else online? Okay, committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Got a motion by Steinmetz. Discussion. It's like we've got a couple of proposed amendments. Senator Boner first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody, for the testimony on this one. I know it's an important topic to lots of people. I think it's important we get this bill out of committee and to the floor. And in that spirit, I'm offering an amendment to move this bill forward. Basically, what the amendment would do would get rid of the drop boxes and allow for the option of something similar to think of a safe deposit box at a bank where you can still deposit a ballot into the courthouse. So it's not a isolated structure. It's not, if you're going to try and burn it down, you're going to burn down the whole courthouse, frankly. So something that's far more secure than a drop box, but still allows for after hours voting, which is important for working class communities such as mine. And like I said, I think this is really important to get this bill out of committee and move it to the floor because it's an important topic. So a few details as to what the amendment does. The receptacle should only be used for ballots and nothing else. It should be under video surveillance and checked daily, not every business day, but daily. And then it also allows the possibility of using other government buildings in the county that have similar standards, but the clerks need an MOU in order to use another government building in the county. Taking care of places like Fremont, Lincoln, and others, I'm sure, Carbon, that folks have to drive long distances to get their county seats. So that's what the amendment does, trying to strike a balance between some of the stated concerns while still removing the drop boxes. And like I said, we'll see how this amendment does on the floor. But I think it's important we take care of the concerns we've heard here. And that's the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Discussion on the amendment. Discussion? Everybody understand it? Has the audience received a copy of it, or interested people? Especially our elected officials. We have elected clerks here. Can we maybe share it with, have you guys seen it? You have. I'm getting up and downs and side to sides. I'm sorry. Thank you. Anybody else want to look at the amendment? So just, I'm going to read it in its entirety for the people online. So this is a proposed amendment from Senator Boner. Page 1, line 14, after any clerk insert or to a secured receptacle is provided in this section, Page 2, line 4, after Dropbox, insert. A county clerk may receive ballots through a secured receptacle in the courthouse or in another government building in the county. The receptacle may be accessible on the exterior of the courthouse or other governmental or government building, provided the ballots, it should be a that in there, maybe, provided the ballots, after being inserted into the receptacle, are deposited into a secure location within the courthouse or other government building, period. The receptacle shall only be used for the purpose of receiving ballots and only be accessible by the county clerk or his designee. The receptacle shall be under video surveillance and checked daily by the clerk or his designee. A clerk shall have a memorandum, easy for you to say, right? A clerk shall have a memorandum of understanding in place in order to use a government building other than the county courthouse for the purpose of hosting a secured receptacle. Page 2, line 8, after receptacle, insert located outside a building and. Discussion. I look to elected officials if they want to comment on this. Not seeing any. Secretary of State Gray.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're just seeing this. We'll continue to evaluate it, certainly understand the intent and want the bill to move forward. But just reading it, I think there's some things we need to clarify. But certainly we'll continue to evaluate it.
Thank you, sir. Questions from Mr. Secretary? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, this is a lot like what we do in Trona County already. So I'm trying to get,
Do you have a question for the Secretary?
I did not. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get to it.
Apologize for that.
I apologize.
It's kind of early.
Yeah.
Senator Boner?
Yeah, and my apologies. This also allows for the situation in Shawnee County where you have the drop box like right there, yeah, in the courthouse at the clerk's office. So there's that.
Representative Knapp, it's your bill.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So this is the first time I'm seeing this as well. And I'm assuming that it is a external receptacle that leads to an internal box within the clerk's office, or is it just within the courthouse itself?
Senator Boner?
Yeah, once again, Mr. Chairman, it could be either one. Like you have a situation in Shawnee County where they have a box within their office, and so people don't have to wait in line apparently. And then the other concept is that it's, think of a safe deposit box in your bank, where you drop it in from the outside, but it goes inside and there's no way to get it out. So
I think the banks call that a night drop.
Night drop or something
Yeah.
like that, right?
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, just one comment. I still feel like we're making exceptions to what should be a uniform rule and adding to other counties what they don't have now versus taking six or seven and saying this is not the practice and this is not in statute. So, but it's of course the committee's prerogative on the amendment. So that would just be my comment.
Thank you very much. I think we have more copies if anybody wants. Yeah, Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Representative Knapp, don't run away quite so quickly.
Oh, I thought you meant to sponsor the amendment, but go
No, the
ahead.
sponsor of the bill.
Okay.
Representative Knapp, I guess my question would be, if this is how we can move the bill forward out of this committee, would you be amenable to the amendment or not, if that's what it takes to get it out of this committee?
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I would be amicable to the amendment to move the bill forward, yes.
Thank you both. All right. Further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Didn't hear any. Any further amendments on the bill? Okay, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first one I'd like to address is
We're
on
sharing,
page
yeah.
1, and I didn't get this one drafted up. It was brought to us by the county clerks, and on line 13 and 14, they wanted to insert after, on line 13, after delivered to, they wanted the county clerk or their designee.
I'm sorry, I was looking at this other one.
No,
This
on
is
the
off the
bill,
cuff.
so
Okay.
this one's from, I didn't have this one drafted.
Okay,
Because the county clerks had presented it to us, so I just wrote it in the bill.
Yeah.
So it's on page 1, line 13, after hand delivered to, add back in the word "the county clerk or their designee."
would
And I
you,
believe that was what they had wanted there.
so I have the same note on my area. We had a discussion about whether the designee was sworn to uphold the law. So I was wondering if we said sworn designee, if that would be friendly or not, because it seems like we had that discussion.
I see head nods, so I would consider that a friendly amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so read it all in their entirety.
On line 13, after delivered to the county clerk or their sworn designee,
Period.
period.
Okay, that's the amendment. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Looks like a unanimous aye. Any opposed? See, I was right. Next, back to you, Senator Steinmetz, on your other amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would just allow for a reimbursement in speaking with some folks that have served as county clerks in the past and the good Secretary of State. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't providing for an unfunded mandate, and it sounds like there are probably some HAVA funds available that would help with this if counties had to move their boxes inside or comply with requirements of this bill. And so basically, it would allow for a reimbursement from any available federal funds appropriated to the Secretary of State, provided that the expenditure was made for purposes of this act, this section.
Okay.
So that's all it does.
Do people, have you seen it, Representative Knapp?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't get it to him, I'm sorry.
Okay. Just, it adds a new section B, everybody, and allows for this reimbursement mechanism, assuming there are funds. So Representative Knapp, we'll go to you. So we got to get amendments to enough for everybody. We just got to. Thank you. Representative Knapp, to you.
Mr. Chairman, I would see that as a friendly amendment.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else on that? Ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's second proposed amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That amendment's carried. Anything else on the bill? Anything else on the bill? Let's call the roll on this one.
This is a roll call vote for House Bill 131, engrossed, ballot drop boxes prohibition. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
No.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
No. Got 3 ayes, 2 noes. It's passed. And who's going to carry it on the floor? We've got a co-sponsor here. Would be you, Steinmetz, Senator Steinmetz?
I can do that.
Since you've been in the committee, well, however that works with the sponsor, but she's ready and willing to go too, so.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, can we go over the vote again? It was, can you say it again? Boner? Dockstetter?
Aye.
Landon?
No.
Steinmetz?
Aye.
Chairman Case?
No,
Okay, got it.
3-2.
Thank you.
So that definitely is carried. And Steinmetz will be possibly the lead on the floor, and let's go to the next one. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 154, false voting amendments. And Representative Brady, welcome.
Thank you again, Chairman.
Sure, you bet.
Members.
Go ahead.
So, false voting amendments, HB 0154. I'll go over this bill briefly. An act relating to elections clarifying that the false voting statute includes out-of-state voting, authorizing the Secretary of State to request an investigation, and providing for an effective date. So it's just a change under the, or a small amendment under existing law. So under Section A, Romanet 4, voting or offering to vote more than once in an election, including voting more than once in a Wyoming election or voting in any other state, and then voting, or offering to vote in Wyoming for the same federal election. So just right there, the existing law does include criminal charges for voting twice within a Wyoming election, but it doesn't include voting in another state and then in Wyoming. So that's why that amendment was added. And then under E, the county sheriff shall investigate acts of false voting at the request of, and adding in the Secretary of State or the county clerk, when it comes to reasonable cause to believe that a person has committed false voting. So the reason for that is for, if information came directly to the Secretary of State's office, then he can initiate an investigation, and rather than just leave it up to the county clerk for the information to get to that location. So is there anything I can explain else on this bill for you or answer some questions?
Any questions for Representative Brady? Senator Landon?
Representative Brady, thank you. It's nice to see you this morning.
Thank you. You as well.
So this would allow the Secretary of State to call any county sheriff in Wyoming and demand an investigation. I'm just wondering how that's going to work and why it wouldn't be adequate to just simply get a hold of the county clerk, who then no doubt has a relationship with the county sheriff in that county already. I'm just trying to track that a little bit.
Well, I think it would.
Representative Brady?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. So I'm sure the Secretary of State's office can help direct some information on that. But if information came in directly to this Secretary of State's office, an investigation can begin if it came to that first. It's good to have more coverage, I think, than less.
Thank you, thank you. Anybody else for Representative Brady? So Representative Brady, I'm trying to understand, adding a language on page 2, lines 3 through 6. I'm not sure that our law doesn't already cover that, because it does say voting or offering to vote more than once in an election. It doesn't specify any qualifiers on that, so I think it would already be covered, but
Well,
explain to me where
it's-
I'm wrong on that, if you can, Representative
Yeah,
Brady.
okay. It prevents problems while we can investigate and prosecute double voting within the conflicts of Wyoming. If we're alerted to the same individual voted in another state and then try to vote in Wyoming federal election, we could do nothing. It's not clear in the statute.
Okay, we'll find out from others about that too. so.
Okay,
Because it does say voting or offering to vote more than once in an election,
right, but it's not clear.
but it doesn't limit it to Wyoming, it's just more than once in an election.
Right, but this is just making
To
it
you.
clear that if it's in another state, so it's, yeah, just making it clear that it could be either case. It could be twice in one state or our state or over the lines.
Okay,
State
we'll look into
lines.
this more, appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Questions for
Anyone else?
Representative Brady? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Who else? Mr. Secretary, would you like to cover this one? Before the Secretary sits down, there's a slight housekeeping I want to telegraph. We have some visitors from the National Conference of Insurance Legislators that are going to give us 15-minute presentation, and we're going to accommodate their schedule. I think they're going to be here about 8 o'clock. So you guys will all get a sit for that presentation but thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and to my left is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director and Counsel. We support House Bill 154. This is a really good cleanup bill, and Wyoming state law is slightly unclear right now on whether double voting in another state is an actionable item, and we need to clarify this, we really feel, as we look at Title 22. As Wyoming statute currently reads, false voting is specified in 22-26-106A, Romanet 4, deals with what could be called double voting or voting more than once in an election. However, the existing statutory language does not appear to currently specify coverage to double voting in Wyoming in another state, and we believe could currently only cover voting more than once in a Wyoming election if read in a certain way. At best, this statute is unclear. However, I think it's more likely the statute would be read to possibly only cover those voting or offering to vote more than once in a Wyoming election. This interpretation is especially supported given the Wyoming Election Code's definition of election, which you can find in 22-101-102A, Romanet 12, which states that election, when used without qualifying adjectives, means all elections participated in by the voters of a city, town, county, district, or, this is key, the state. And then it ends, the state meaning Wyoming. So, while the statute criminalizes double voting within Wyoming, there's at least a very strong argument that it is unclear on another jurisdiction participating in the same, voting in another jurisdiction in the same federal election. Obviously, this presents problems in that while we can investigate and prosecute double voting within the confines of Wyoming with clarity, in other cases, the statute is unclear. So we really feel we should make this clear on double voting. And as the committee will note, the bill also amends subsection E by providing that a county sheriff shall investigate acts of false voting at the request of the Secretary of State. And this really makes sense to add this and is in line with the statutes. Really, if you look at the collaboration in the statutes, it's not only the county clerks that can turn over election complaints and information to local jurisdictions. It's also the Secretary of State, in addition to our authority to turn it over with the AG. So looking at Title 22, seeing that subsection, we think it makes sense to also clean that up in the statute. It's not anything, no turf war. It's really just about another way of us getting the information to the proper entities. And there have been cases, a few where, we've had situations in Weston County where meetings have been declined. And so in that case, it'll just allow us to get the information to the proper entities. But that's why we also think that section of the bill is also important. We're very supportive of the bill. Obviously, under existing law, in these cases of double voting, we'd adhere to the law. I think we'd make a case to the prosecutors that it does cover double voting in other jurisdictions, but we'd like it to be clear, and we think this bill does that. So we support the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Questions for Mr. Secretary? Thank you very much. Hi, Mr. Rubino, how are you? All right, let's keep going with elected officials. Any clerks and their representatives? Representative? Ms. Langford? Ms. Clerk Lee, how are you guys doing today?
We're fine, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the County Clerks Association. And joining me at the table today is the Honorable Deborah Lee. She's the Laramie County Clerk. And back sitting keeping our seats warm is the Honorable Mo Murphy. She's the Teton County Clerk as well.
Excellent.
And the clerks have reviewed this piece of legislation. We have no position on it. We agree and we acknowledge that people should only be voting once in the state of Wyoming. And that's our jurisdiction, is the state of Wyoming. And that we've already got law to support that. So with that, would stand for questions. And that's
For your
all we have.
non-testimony, that's
Yeah,
great.
for our non-testimony. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Langford? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Thank you. Ms. Langford, just real quickly, I'm not sure the bill does anything really except in paragraph D, which any concerns that that the state government could come in working with the sheriff. I would hope that there'd be communication there. Any concerns that there wouldn't be, that somebody could go around our clerks and be contacting our local sheriffs, and any concern there?
Ms. Langford?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I think the only concern that I brought, since I did ask a couple sheriffs, they feel that their responsibility is to the county clerk, to deal with those situations. I don't know what the reaction really would be if they were contacted by the Secretary of State's office, in that they have the Attorney General to enforce their law. And I would imagine that they would treat them as any other citizen bringing a complaint, but I don't know if they'd get any heightened help, or, what that response would actually be. Because at this point in time, county clerks bring those issues to the sheriff, and then they pursue those with an investigation. And then if it warrants it, then they prosecute. So that's procedure now.
Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, just as a follow-up, I would certainly hope that the sheriff would then contact the county clerk. So hopefully in a roundabout way, we would at least get the communication that we need to have, so.
In my experience, Mr. Chairman,
Langford?
Senator Landon, and especially in recent election seasons, there's been quite a rapport between sheriff's offices and the county clerks for security reasons and those kinds of things. Sheriffs and emergency management are far more involved in elections now than they have been in the past. Just for security and polling places, transfer of ballots, those kinds of things, where they've been involved, where in the past they haven't so much. So.
Anybody else? Ms. Lee, did you wish to say anything?
No, Mr. Chairman. Fine, thank you.
All right, thank you. Who else would like to testify on this bill? Ms. Simmons? Anybody else we got extra chairs, you want to get ready? Ms. Simmons?
Good morning, Chairman. Gail Simmons, Civics 307, and why vote? I'm from Sheridan County. I guess I'm on and against, given that I believe this is another bill that solves problems that do not exist. This bill has two provisions, Mr. Chairman. The first is to expand on the existing prohibition against voting more than once in an election. Adding words to explain what an election is does not change the fact that it is already clear. Amending page 2, line 3 after election, lines 4, 5, and 6 through election removes this unnecessary redundancy. The second provision, Mr. Chairman, is on page 2, line 9, by inserting the Secretary of State into the administration of county elections, which are the responsibility of the duly elected county clerk. I see three problems with this. The county sheriff, another duly elected officer of the county, investigates potential election violations from the county clerk. Any appropriate investigation initiated by the Secretary of State should go to the State Attorney General. Second, this increases the scope of responsibility of the Secretary of State beyond that of Wyoming Statute 22-2103, which is solely to maintain uniformity in the applications and operations of the election laws of Wyoming. Third, why insert the Secretary of State for this offense but not any other? For example, in 22-26-102 registration offenses, it mirrors the language that's currently in this particular section. So why this section but not the other? Particularly given that there's been no indication that there's been a problem. Further, 22-26-121 covers violation of election code, complaints, investigations, and procedures. Violations, it specifies, violations at the county level go to the county clerk. Violations at the statewide level go to the Secretary of State. Amending page 2, line 9 to delete the inserted language removes that inconsistency, Mr. Chairman. If the bill is to move forward, recommend only retaining the extended definition of voting more than once in an election. But overall, this solves a problem that does not exist, and I stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Simmons? Questions for Ms. Simmons? Senator Landon? Oh, okay, Ms. Simmons, and I should ask this of the clerks, I want to put it out there for everybody. Do we have any instances of people voting twice in an election? And how many do we know about that? Anybody, we got somebody that can answer that. We'll get you in a minute. Have a seat. Well, thank you. Keep that in mind. I want to hear that. All right, ma'am, you're next. Welcome.
Oh,
Green light.
thank you.
and
Yep.
They got to get close.
Sherry Davis from Cook County, and appreciate you, Chair, and the committee for considering this legislation. So the clarity of voting, we see what kind of issue it is, you know, in our counties, in our state. People are concerned, and we're just trying to clarify the fact that we don't want people double voting. I don't know if we should wait till one person does it, or 5 people do it, or 35 people do it. Where's the number where we just make safeguards to protect ourselves? We do know that we really lack residency requirements, and so we vote, and I'm in Crook County. I shop in South Dakota often, which I got to work on apparently, keep our money in our state. But so you could vote there, right? And come over and vote in Wyoming. So I think the biggest challenge we have is we're all decent people. We might sit a little bit on a different part of the fence, but we all believe in doing what's right. So it's really hard for us to imagine that people would intentionally do what's wrong. But we know it's true. We have court systems, we have jails, we have all kinds of things that are just attempts to manipulate the system for whatever agenda, right? Maybe just to show they can. So when we're looking to put a safeguard in place to protect our very voting rights, which decides our leadership, which defines our country, our state, our county, you know, our leaderships define those things. People want to feel like we can trust elections. You know, I've heard people say, and I'm thinking you have too, that they don't vote because it doesn't matter. Not because their one vote doesn't count anymore, but because the elections are untrustworthy. That's something we need to remove from the thought of people, because then we remove the thought of freedom or empowerment, that we have some kind of say about what goes on for us. If we're just looking for a little clarification, right, or a little extra support, the clerks have no concerns about this, and I appreciate their testimony. We're just trying to have an election that people can trust. And if we can just put a few things in there that can say this is something that people can stand on, I'm not sure like what the number is we need to find that 10 people did it or 20 people did it, right? Let's just let the people feel safe about elections. And I do stand for questions.
Okay, questions for Ms. Davis? Any questions for Ms. Davis? Ms. Davis, is it your testimony that for you to vote in South Dakota and vote in Wyoming would be legal and permitted?
So it should not be, but if we lack clarity on that, then, so I hate to compare our place with things that happened back east or whatever, but there was an election in Georgia where people were knowingly just coming over and voting. Like, if we can stiffen the consequences for those kind of choices, you know, our biggest issue is people get to do things. I mean, like the illegals, right? They wrecked in our county. The driver, which I think they call a coyote, right? Tumbled the car, wasn't going to do well before they could even pass in Sundance, Wyoming. Okay, I'm just saying, before they could even go process everyone. They had a new driver there. The sheriff did show up. I'm not asking questions about what happened, but I'm a nurse and I know the people working in the ER, and they was in a new car and driving on their way.
But can you connect that to voting somehow?
Yeah, I'm talking about lack of consequences for choices. So thank you,
see.
Chairman Case. So if we are not having any clear rules in place with consequences, then why not just do it? And so what happened is they removed consequences for illegals under the present government. So I'm just saying, let's give clarity so people can say, if I do that, there's consequences, right? You can't do that. It's very clear, and this will happen if you do. Once again, we're in a room full of good people who try to do what's right. And I wish that was true for everyone across the board, but it is not. And that's why we have government. That's why we have laws. And we as voters want to feel safe about our elections. And it's clear that we don't, right? It's clear if you want to say generality, I'm not going to say as a whole, but there's a lot of people, and we all know it, who don't trust our elections. And I think, and I respect the clerk of courts who's trying to say, like, we're willing to work with people. We don't want people to feel this way. We're willing to go through the things that help. And so I'm hoping you as a committee will do the same. Just send it out to the floor and see what people think. Everyone's going to contact their representatives. And these bills are before you because there's a large group of people who are concerned about our election. So let's just help them out. Let's let them think there's a reason to show up again.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Thank you.
I think you might have to yield the other part that a lot of people think that Wyoming elections are incredibly well-run and incredibly lack of problems. And they sort of see people, perhaps like yourself, that question the integrity of something that seems to be done well in Wyoming as being a little bit far out there too. So I think there's both sides.
Chairman Case, I don't want
Please
to
go ahead.
insinuate they're not well-run. I do appreciate the people who run. I do appreciate my own county clerk. So I don't want to insinuate any part on their error,
Thank
but
you.
on the people that do wrong.
I'm doing the best I can, Senator. All right, thank you, ma'am. Let's see, let's go to Ms. Carpio.
Thank you, members of the committee. Chairman Case, my name is Marissa Carpio. I work for the Equality State Policy Center. We do not have a position on this bill, so I'll be really quick because I'm neither a lawyer or a lawmaker. But I do feel that the law is already clear on this and that this bill is duplicative. If double voting is already illegal and the secretary feels like, or the state office feels like they have authority to employ local enforcement officials, I don't think this bill does anything different. Perhaps a solution to chat about in the interim would be an ERIC membership, which is an interstate compact to clean voter rolls and to check for instances of double voting. Thank you. I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Carpio? Could you explain the ERIC membership database?
Yes, it's a group of different states who sign into this membership. It is Electronic Registration Information Center Incorporated, and it is a national group that works to make sure that registration rules are consistent and there's no double instances of registration or voting across the states.
So what it would allow if we were to belong to it is that you could, if all states belong to it, there'd be a national registry of voter registrants, so that if someone's appearing to vote in a particular state, they could look to see if they had in fact voted in another state or registered in another state. Is that correct?
As far as I understand, Mr. Chairman, as far as I understand, but I think the county clerks may know a little bit more than I do on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. You're the one who brought it up. Anything else for Ms. Carpio? Thank you. Clerk Murphy, welcome. A long drive for you.
Thank you.
I hope you didn't have those terrible roads.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer your question from earlier, it's funny, I had this conversation with my predecessor, Sherry Daigle, a couple of months ago on if she had ever experienced somebody double voting. And she did one time in her 27 years as clerk, and it was a woman that voted in Teton, and I can only speak for my county. I don't know
Right.
about it. But there was a woman that voted in Teton County and in Utah, and she was prosecuted for a felony in Utah. So that's the only case that I know of.
Do you know more about that circumstance? How did Utah know that they voted in Wyoming? And do you
I
remember
think
that
there
con-
was a complaint made or somebody called to investigate it.
And how long have you been the clerk?
4.5 years.
So 27 plus 4.5, we got 30 31 years, one instance.
I have also had a complaint that somebody was double registered, or had voted, claimed he had voted in Arizona and in Wyoming, but I called Arizona and they had no record of him, so that was me investigating. I didn't turn it to our sheriff because he wasn't registered or he hadn't voted in Arizona.
So I think Clerk Murphy is kind of in a unique position because her community has day workers that come in from another state, more than, I think, maybe not as many as Cheyenne, but, and so that's not an issue either. Clerk Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, not in my experience.
Okay, thank you. Really appreciate it. Anybody else? Mr. Corinthy, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joey Corrini, Rural Wyoming Matters. I don't mind clarifying the language, an election in Wyoming or another election and an election in Wyoming. But my experience in Wyoming elections, it happens all the time. People try to double vote all the time. So I have a problem with the language that says, or offering to vote. Because I do have a lot of elderly voters in Carbon County who vote absentee, then show up on election day, they forgot they voted.
Sure.
We have a process to identify that and say, hey, the same thing on the other side. People, I didn't request this absentee ballot. Well, is this your signature right here? Well, you did. But what we're doing here is now criminalizing that mistake. So I don't mind the clarifying language. People have questions. The committee has questions. Okay, fine. Make the sausage. Whatever we got to say. If you're voting in Wyoming, you can't vote somewhere else. If you're voting somewhere else, you can't vote in Wyoming. Now it's clear, but the offering to vote, prisons are already full, and we don't need to be stacking it full of old people that forgot, okay, I handed in an absentee ballot. The second provision under Section E, granting the Secretary of State the ability to initiate these investigations with the county sheriff on their own, I got a little heartburn on. I think maybe the language should say at the request of the Secretary of State in conjunction with a county clerk that has reasonable concern. And that's not to take anything away from the clerks or give something to the Secretary of State or vice versa. But we've seen a lot of election issues come up over the last couple of years, and this year's been particularly festive and colorful between these two groups. And I think by saying in law, at very least they have to work together, we're recognizing they don't work for each other, they don't work against each other. They should be working with each other for the people of Wyoming and the elections. And maybe some of the contentiousness in some of the conversations we're seeing will go away. But I don't think it should be absolutely one or the other. If the Secretary of State has a complaint in his office, there's nothing that should preclude him from working with that county clerk to get a hold of their county sheriff. But I think we can move forward in a more bridge building type posture if we just tweak a few of these words, don't criminalize old people, and don't be shooting just absolute authority to one group or the other. I mean, we're Wyoming. We work together.
Thank you.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Corrinti. Questions for Mr. Corrinti? Let me just be clear. Your suggestion on line 5, page 2, would be to get rid of the words "or offering to vote" in the comma. Would that be right?
Removing or amending to something that doesn't criminalize people with bad memories or advanced age. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And then loud and clear on the second one. All right. I think Ms. Russell, you're next.
Mr. Chairman,
Can you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
That's what I was about to do.
Okay.
I'm Kathy Russell, Executive Director for the Wyoming Republican Party, and I'm here to share the views expressed through legislative priorities, platform planks, and resolutions that the party would stand in favor of this. We have a number of those very items that point to the importance. Nationwide, this is, and certainly within the state, this is a top priority, one of 3 that were a top priority because of the problems that have been revealed since 2016. In the last 15 years plus, there have been a number of laws changed to allow, or at least look the other way when there are problems in election integrity. This particular bill closes one of those loopholes. In defense of the Secretary of State being able to investigate, the Secretary of State is the only one who can see statewide the voter rolls, who voted, when, where. And so they're in a unique position to see what's going on. Where we have a big problem, I as executive director have looked into this at the request of some folks, that we can't see what's happening in another state. One of the fixes could potentially be an MOU with neighboring states to see if there is a problem, or with our snowbird states to see if there is double voting going on. There have been discussions, but nothing has moved forward. So for instance, I personally, in the office, have received calls from 2 or 3 different people who said they vote in numerous states because they have properties in numerous states. You don't investigate what you don't find, and you don't find what you don't investigate, and what's not reported can't be investigated. But some of those things could be revealed through, for example, MOUs with other states, secretaries of state. This is an issue, and I think it's important to recognize that it's an issue for our people because they talk to each other. We're a small state. We have people who work in the various offices, and that includes offices that involve certifying that a person is a resident or a citizen or a citizen. So this is an important issue. We ask you to please pass this bill, get it on the floor, and let's debate this robustly. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Russell? Questions? Ms. Russell, I've got a couple of questions. You mentioned problems since 2016. Are those problems in Wyoming?
They're nationwide. These
Wyoming?
bills, these laws were passed nationwide to affect elections. One of them is drop boxes, the introduction of drop boxes. Another was the reduction in precinct voting places. There have been a number of these kinds of things that have affected our voting ability and capabilities for our people.
And then, Ms. Russell, you mentioned that, I think you mentioned that you had talked to people that had voted where they had property in other states.
Correct.
Did they also vote in Wyoming?
Yes,
Did you report that as?
they didn't give me their names. They called to complain.
So
those kinds of things can't be.
Just a second, ma'am. So they called anonymously and told you they had committed fraud,
Correct,
but you didn't have their name?
correct.
More than one person?
Yes,
Interesting. That is a crime in Wyoming. Okay. So maybe you could ask their name next time. I'd hope they would.
I did.
And then I think that's it. Thank you, Ms. Russell.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Go
Good
ahead.
morning. I'm still Jill Kaufman from Platte County.
Welcome.
I just wanted to mention and remind everyone that the legislature in our Constitution, the legislature shall pass laws to secure the purity of elections and guard against fraud in the elective franchise. I hear a lot of times in testimony that everybody says there's no fraud and no fraud and no fraud in Wyoming. That is an untrue statement, and you're being misled. In my other previous testimonies, there is fraud in Wyoming, and we are trying to combat that. So I am very much encouraged this simple bill to go in and state that we can't have people from outside of our state to vote. I am an election judge in Platte County for a number of years now, and we run into that challenge a lot. We have people coming in and they're giving their ID from Colorado. We don't know if they have voted in Colorado or not, and that is something that is a loophole that we should just simply protect. And for the Secretary of State to be able to investigate fraud or any type of things in our election, that is his job. So I encourage you to pass this bill, at least to get on the floor and have debate. I stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Questions for Ms. Kaufman? Ms. Kaufman, do you have specific instances of the fraud that you say that happened?
Yes, and I testified it to you in front of SF 184.
And did you provide that to the?
I've provided it in your handouts, yes, sir.
Have you provided it to either the county attorney or the county clerk?
The clerk, yes, and the county attorney, no. They weren't in the willingness to take that, and I have also in the process with the Secretary of State, handing claims.
All right, so did anybody investigate those claims?
Not as of yet. In a couple counties, yes, they are.
And was fraud found?
They're investigating right now,
Okay, thank you very much.
as far as I know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Mr. Chairman, Mark Kep,
Yeah.
Crook County, Wyoming. I want to clarify real quick. There was some testimony about changing language about the double voting earlier. I just want to clarify that that was already the existing law. So where it says voting or offering to vote more than once in election, that's existing statute right now. So that's not.
Hold on. Well, it might be moved from somewhere else. Let's just look here.
22-26-106.
Yeah, I'm working to catch up with you, Mr. Cap. Do you have it, Senator Steinmetz?
It's on the line right above the other one.
Oh, sure it is. So everybody, he's referring to line 2 in old law, voting or offering to vote. So.
I'm just clarifying that.
Perfect, thank
That's
you.
old law.
Yeah.
Number one, and also you asked a question about is there any study showing how many people double vote? And there's actually a study out from 2020 from Cambridge University Press, March 6, 2020, found that 1 in 4,000 roughly votes are double voted. So, voted twice. They don't have hard numbers on it. So just you were asking if there's any data. I found some data on that. And then the second thing in regard to the commentary about ERIC, this is February 18th, 2025. There's currently a bill in Georgia for them to pull out of ERIC along with a bunch of other states. So if everybody's pulling out of it, it's not going to be a good way to share information.
Right, and Mr. Kep, the Cambridge study of voter fraud, do you know if that included Wyoming? Were there incidents of fraud in Wyoming, or was that a nationwide study?
Is it all right if I read the abstract, or I don't want to take a lot of time? I don't know. It was a national study, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't Wyoming specific.
Not Wyoming
May have
specific.
included Wyoming, but I
Yes,
don't
sir.
know that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much. Any questions for Mr. Kep? Okay. Who else would like to address? Anybody else? Is there anybody online? I'm sorry. Lily? Do we have anybody online on this one? And while we're going online, I'd like to ask a question. It was mentioned earlier, and I meant to ask this of Ms. Russell, but it's okay, Ms. Russell, it's a general question, that Wyoming clerks don't know if the voter connections to other counties. There's a statewide voter registration system, right? So you do know, heads are nodding, if someone votes in another county, right? Is that true? Heads are nodding, so we'll go with that. Who do we got online? Excellent, old colleague. Not an old colleague, a young colleague, a middle-aged colleague.
Good recovery, Mr. Chairman.
Me
My
too.
name
Welcome.
is Marty Halverson, and I live in Star Valley, Wyoming, home of the Wyoming common snowbird. And I'm testifying this morning in support of House Bill 154. Voting in 2 states happens. Voting in 2 Wyoming jurisdictions happens. And we have people that admit it. There are bad actors who want to flip Wyoming from red to blue. And in this age of by any means necessary, they will come into Wyoming. They will vote here, or they will vote in multiple states where they might have other properties. I don't know how to catch and prosecute these people, but I have an idea of how we might be able to prevent it going forward. For those of you that don't have a copy of the voter registration form in front of you, the first section is eligibility. It has 2 true or false questions and then gets to the convicted felon question. If we could add a third true or false question, it would be something like, quote, I am not registered to vote in another state or another Wyoming jurisdiction. And as the form says, if you answered false to any of the above questions, do not complete this form. Also on the voter registration form, there is an oath. And as I said, in this age of by any means necessary, oaths are meaningless to bad actors. Indeed, with little inclination in this state to prosecute for false swearing on the voter registration form, would-be cheaters have little to fear. In April of 2021, after our first foray into poll watching in November of 2020, we were invited to speak to the meeting of the County Clerks Association. If there's one thing every county clerk in Wyoming agrees on, it's that there is, quote, no interest in pursuing voter fraud. County attorneys, county sheriffs just can't be bothered. As to catching the folks who might have voted in more than one Wyoming jurisdiction, please look at flipping the following two deadlines. In 2024, the deadline for entering all new voter registrants into WyoReg was December 5th. This was a full month after the election, 3 weeks after the county election certifications, and 2 weeks after the state election certifications. It makes no sense to me to certify elections before new voter election day registrants are entered into WyoReg. That deadline needs to move up on the calendar and certifications need to be moved down. President Beitman has his Senate File 190, which does move down certification dates by a week, but I would suggest you look at extending that. If on December 1st, a red flag is thrown up by WyoReg, no, he's a convicted felon, hasn't had his rights restored. He is ineligible to vote. What to do? How do you invalidate that ballot? It's already been certified. We all know in Wyoming that 2, 3, 4, 5 votes can swing an election. In one county, at least one precinct has a direct link to WyoReg on election day. New registrants are entered immediately, offhand, without knowing too much about it. I think this is a good idea. We support including the Secretary of State, as it shows on page 2. The Secretary of State has on his website a complaint form where if a public election observer or a poll watcher sees something, they are free to fill out that complaint form and send it to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State, I agree, should work in conjunction with the county clerk and the county sheriff, but the Secretary of State absolutely, positively needs to be involved. The county clerks would love us to notify the clerks first. I say to that, maybe. We do not, I'm speaking as a poll watcher now. I've poll watched in 5 Wyoming elections since 2020. We do not serve the county clerks. We serve the public. And it is the public and the Secretary of State to whom we would first report problems. Well, I should say second. Any observations of any problems, our poll watchers are instructed to approach the chief election judge at the polling location, but then also to report to the Secretary of State.
So,
yes, go ahead.
There's some grumbling on the committee that you're not focusing on the bill. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I did diverge a little bit.
Okay,
But
thank
so, on page 2, we think it absolutely needs to be codified that voting twice or 3 times or 4 times is deserving of a penalty. And including the Secretary of State in this is crucial. So I have addressed the bill, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Halverson? Any questions? Thank you very much. Who else is on? Let's bring her in. And just by housekeeping, for our good friends from NCOIL that are here, welcome. We'll take you up after this bill. Ms. Freeze, welcome.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, just a couple things I wanted to maybe wrap up a little bit. So the only one I've had in Fremont County that was potentially voted twice is exactly what Mr. Coriandi talked about. We had a couple, they had gotten their ballot 45 days before the election, immediately sent it back in. Our counting center had already processed the ballot. They were at the polls. We caught them at the polls and asked them to come to the office to look because they were clear that they had not voted absentee. So they came here, we showed them their envelopes and they were like, oh yeah, we did that a long time ago. So I agree with Joey's amendment. We don't want to hurt somebody who just has a forgetful mind when they wanted to get their stuff done early. I just wanted to go through the process right now of what we do. So if somebody sends a complaint to us, which it should be to us, because we're the ones who are going to know who voted in the election first. We're going to have that information in our system. Don't mind sharing all this information with the Secretary of State. Obviously, we would like to make sure no people are voting across state lines. So first of all, we would see if we have any duplicates in our process here. If we saw that somebody had voted twice, we would go to the sheriff's office or whoever's jurisdiction. So if it's somebody who lived in the city of Lander, it would be that jurisdiction, just so that you know, that's where we have to send them to. And my question is would they have, so if I got somebody telling me like Ms. Russell did and said, hey, I voted both places and I know who they were, I would start that investigation. So does my sheriff's office have the jurisdiction or do they have the ability to talk to somebody on the other side? That would be a question for me, because certainly if we know people are voting in 2 places, I think that's the big thing is we don't know that. We don't have any system that tells us, who has voted where. The Help America Vote Act system requirements, we eventually were supposed to be, the reason we did it across the nation is we were all supposed to hook into each other at one point in time so that we would all have that information, but that never came to fruition. So if we had a way to say who had voted in another state, that would be very helpful to us. So our like I said, our sheriff would investigate what they could. They're going to get the information from the county clerk about where did they vote. They're going to have to get all that information from us. And so we're going to have to start at our level to do that, have no problem sharing that with the Secretary of State. I think that's the only things I had on that. So if you had any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions for Clerk Freese? Any questions? Clerk Freese, if the double voting occurred within Wyoming, you would know that, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
And explain how you would know that.
Because our state system is a state system, so everything is across the state. And we have a procedure called the duplicate check. And so you would see if you have duplications in your own county, and then you could open it up statewide and you can look and see if you have duplications across the state, as the Secretary of State would also have that ability.
Okay, and that's a system that the clerks have on election day, right?
So some of us are using the state, the Secretary of State's e-poll book system. We can catch them immediately that they've already voted in our county. Those who are on paper still would not have that ability. They would have to do that afterwards. And the 30-day period of putting all of those registrations in the system, it takes that long to put them into the system. You have to put every single one of those in. So if you're not on the e-poll book system, you wouldn't find it out until you put that into the system.
Are we all going to move towards the e-poll book system?
Right now, it is optional whether you use the system or not. I think the Secretary of State could tell you more about whether or not he would want us all to go to that system. Right now, it's optional to us if we use it.
Okay. And so one last question in the sense that it seems to be a lot of folks are saying that there is fraudulent voting in other states, potentially more kind of like a snowbird situation. Have you ever experienced that? And I realize you don't have a way to know that, but.
So I had heard discussion, it's nobody I knew, not directly to me. I had never heard it directly to me. It was kind of third party that somebody said, well, I have land in Arizona and I got a ballot automatically and that's from that state. And my question to the person who told me is, well, I hope they didn't vote it. I mean, if they are voting here in Wyoming, why would they vote somewhere else? That knowing if the people of Wyoming are going to knowingly vote in another state just because it was sent to them, that's wrong. And so it's not us that's causing the problem with, if we don't know, I mean, if we don't know, if I certainly knew, I mean, again, I've told this committee a number of times, when I'm told about something, I immediately take it to my county attorney because it is important that we prosecute these people so that other people understand that this is serious and that we take it seriously and we're going to prosecute you. I can't prosecute them, but I'm going to at least take them to my county attorney and see if we can get them prosecuted for the things they're doing incorrectly.
And so it is illegal for them to vote in another state and try to vote in Wyoming.
Absolutely. If it's a federal election, now, if they have the right to vote in some kind of a soil conservation district because they're a landowner in Arizona, obviously they could do that. But a federal election, absolutely, you're not supposed to vote in two locations.
Thank you, Clerk Freeze. Anything else for Clerk Freeze? Thank you. Anybody else online? Okay, committee, we've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? Motion by Boner, discussion? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've got a couple of at least amendments for consideration, and we can take them up if at your pleasure.
Go ahead.
Paragraph 4, beginning on line 2, page 2. I would offer an amendment to strike in line 2, comma, or offering to vote, comma, and then down on line 5, strike, comma, or offering to vote, comma, eliminating that language of an offer. I just don't think the paragraph needs that. That would read then voting more than once in an election, including voting, et cetera, et cetera. That's my amendment on that
Okay,
paragraph.
let's take that one up. Discussion on Senator Landon's proposed amendment. Discussion, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm assuming that's to get at the, I guess, the testimony that we heard that maybe somebody forgets and.
It's an
and
absentee voter.
Right. And so I'm just wondering has anybody ever been prosecuted for that? It seems like there's no problems and the clerks can use common sense, the county attorney can use common sense. And so I don't know, it seems to me that that'd be a pretty significant change that could open us up to more abuse if we go with the amendment. And I'm just not sure that there's a problem or we're prosecuting somebody just because they made an innocent mistake. So.
Anybody else? Senator Landon? So, to you, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I've got really nothing else. I think obviously we've had plenty of testimony this morning. It says that if they go ahead and vote, it's against the law. We're gonna prosecute them.
So the one thing that the offering to vote catches is if someone has the intention to commit fraud. I mean, they do. It's not a person that's made a mistake or forgot. They actually do have the intention of committing fraud, but they're busted in the middle of it before they get the chance to exercise their ballot. Then that would not be a crime under this. You know, I wonder if we could leave the old language and take out the new language. I'm just throwing that
Mr.
out.
Chairman, I would consider that a friendly amendment. If we feel like we need to leave the old language and come down to line 5 and strike that second reference, I was compelled to bring the amendment just because I think we're going to catch them
Yeah.
either way.
Anybody else? Are you taking that as a friendly amendment? I mean, you don't have to. I just want to know which one to put up for a vote.
Let's put up line 5 for the vote.
Okay,
We can leave the language on line 2.
okay. All those in favor of getting rid of or offering to vote on line 5 indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. I think it's 3-2. So that is carried. Anything else, Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I'll try something on, in paragraph E.
Okay.
That one's a little troubling to me. As you can probably tell, I think it expands some scope where we don't need to. I would suggest striking the language on line 9, the new language, the Secretary of State or, and then come down on line 11 after committed false voting, comma, or at the request of the Secretary of State working in conjunction with the county clerk. Period.
Okay. Everybody think they've got that? Discussion? Senator Steinmetz.
Mr. Chairman, if memory serves me correctly, I think this isn't the first place where the Secretary of State can work with the sheriff's office, and maybe he could explain that a little bit better, but I think if they get a complaint, they can work with the sheriff's office too, so I just don't understand why this would be any different than that.
And Senator Steinmetz, I'm trying to remember, I think the testimony, it might have been Ms. Simmons, testified that this same investigation is in other places with the existing language we have, without the new language referencing the Secretary of State. I believe that was that testimony. Back to you, Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's one of the reasons I brought the amendment, was the fact that this appears in 2 or 3 other places in our statutes. Bringing the Secretary of State in here, it would be more appropriate in my mind to bring it in other places. And this committee can do that going on into the interim or whatever. But this is a pretty significant policy change right here, to have the Secretary of State be able to go directly to one of the sheriffs. All this language does in the amendment is say, you know, we expect people to work together. And certainly the Secretary of State can reach out and request this investigation, just like the clerk could, but the language in the amendment says working in conjunction with the clerk.
Okay, well, I think what I'd like to do is to get you to repeat your amendment, and then we'll put it up to a vote.
Okay. So beginning on line 9, we would strike the new language at the request of the Secretary of State. So the Secretary of State or, that would be stricken. Go down to line 11, person has committed false voting, comma, or at the request of the Secretary of State working in conjunction with the county clerk, period.
Okay. Everybody got it? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'll give it an aye. All those opposed? No. Got 3 noes on that, so that's failed. Any other amendments? Do you want to try just removing the Secretary of State on that?
I don't, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, thank you.
Fair enough.
I think
Anybody
we
else?
know the lay of the land.
Any other amendments? All right, let's call the roll on this one.
This is a roll call vote for House Bill 154, false voting amendments, with amendments. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
No.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
No. So that's a a 3-2 vote. We've got Senator Pearson is on this bill. She can carry it. Just as a timeout, there was a good suggestion made. We might look in the interim, and it might be possible to look at the role of the Secretary of State's office vis-a-vis county elections and kind of that interplay, more generic than trying to put it at each and every instance in there. That might be worth doing. I don't know. I throw it out there. With that, we're going to set aside this work for a minute. We're going to hear some very exciting insurance stuff. You guys are so lucky. We've got good friends from the National Conference of Insurance Legislators. Would you guys come on up and welcome? Okay, look, you're losing half the deal. Don't present the bill too long. Welcome, Will. Welcome, Peter. Good to see you. You survived your night in Cheyenne, Wyoming in the snowstorm of the century? So you turn your green lights on. And we'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Very kind of you to invite us here. I'm Will Malofchik with the National Council of Insurance Legislators, NCOIL for short. This is my colleague, Patrick Gilbert. And despite your kind words of how exciting an insurance is, it's hard not to notice half the room is left. So we'll try and captivate the remaining crowd as best that we can.
And understand, we have a very compressed schedule, and Senator Dockstedter's presenting a bill, and Senator Steinmetz had another committee. We're past crossovers, so all our bills are at the mercy of the House right now. That's why, and we have nice House members that come follow us now. So
Certainly.
Just the debt.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. And, coming here, it struck me that, we do several of these throughout the year where we travel to state legislatures to educate members on NCOIL and the value in participating. And our last three have been so here in Wyoming, to Colorado and Vermont, which are lovely states in their own regard, but the average temperature, I think, has barely been above zero. So I think our next one may be we'll try and go to Hawaii, maybe, or Florida.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do here is just really, like I said, educate members of the committee on what NCOIL is and the value that it serves to insurance legislators and also interested parties. The National Council of Insurance Legislators, we are a national bipartisan legislative organization, and the states are represented principally by legislators serving on their state insurance committees. And what makes NCOIL unique is that NCOIL is the only organization that is comprised of legislators on their insurance committees that develops model laws in insurance for states to consider adopting. So when you put all those things together, NCOIL is unique in that regard. There are other legislative organizations I'm sure you're aware of that do develop model laws, but no one is represented besides NCOIL by strictly insurance legislators developing models in insurance. And a lot of our models have been very popular and adopted by numerous states across the country. A couple of examples are, if you think of several years ago, when Uber and Lyft came into our lives, there needed to be an insurance framework that needed to be developed to take into account those new technologies, and the NCOIL model law that was developed among interested parties and consumer advocates. That's been adopted by almost every state in the country. And we've had just recently, during COVID, you'll recall, what became very popular was similar to Uber and Lyft's, was instead of people, they would deliver food and beverages to folks in their homes. So NCOIL developed a model law to kind of tweak those insurance frameworks to take into account those unique circumstances. And that was adopted a couple years ago, and that's quickly been being adopted by states across the country. And NCOIL's mission is really to preserve the state-based system of insurance that was established by the McCarran-Ferguson Act by Congress way back in the 1940s. We'll get into that just in a few more minutes. And like I said, really to educate state insurance legislators and interested parties. Also that when you come to our meetings, you return to your state legislatures better educated and better equipped to deal with the issues that come before you. So if we could just advance the slide, please. And one more. Thank you. So just a little bit about our structure. So all 50 states are members of NCOIL, but then there are about 35 states that are contributing member states. And what that means is that those states, they pay NCOIL annual dues of $20,000 per year. But with there are certain benefits that attach to being a contributing member state. And some of those benefits are only legislators from contributing states can run for an NCOIL officer position, can be a chair or a vice chair of one of our policy committees. And then also legislators can participate in what we call our stipend program. And what that does is that pays for, I should say reimburses legislators' travel expenses to come to our national meetings. And just to take a second here to really discuss the return on investment of a state's membership in NCOIL. When you talk about a $20,000 payment, almost half of that money is eligible to go towards reimbursing legislators to come to our meetings. And then also, we have a practice of only holding our meetings in states that are contributing member states. So when you talk about the economic activity that results from a lot of folks coming in for the meeting, all for a $20,000 payment, the return on investment is really tremendous, especially when you compare it to other organizations like NCSL, which is a great organization, but their dues payments are exponentially higher than ours. And candidly, I could say it would be difficult to hold one of our national meetings in Wyoming, just because it's difficult for a lot of folks to get to. We try and put in our meetings where folks would fly into an airport and it would be 20 or 30 minutes to the hotel or the convention center. But we do have a couple smaller regional meetings that we would absolutely put in Jackson Hole, in a heartbeat. So that's something to consider when you factor in whether or not to join NCOIL as a contributing member state. And so we have 7 policy committees broken down by each line of insurance. So we have a health insurance committee, life, property and casualty, workers' comp, and the members of those committees are the state legislators such as yourselves who sit on your state insurance committees. And those meetings that I mentioned, the national meetings, we hold 3 of those per year. We have one in the spring, summer, and fall. Our spring one this year is coming up at the end of April in Charleston. In the summer, in the middle of July, will be in Chicago, and in the fall, will be in Atlanta in November. Next slide, please. And just a little bit about our membership. So at these meetings, you're looking at about 300 to 375 total attendees. And on average, we have about 60 legislators attend those meetings from about 30 states. And we also have several insurance commissioners attend our conferences as well, anywhere from about 5 to 12. And right now, the organization really is on an upswing, where attendance has continued to grow over the past several years. And the best example of this is last year, over the course of the year, we had 137 legislators from 41 states attend our meetings. So that's illustrative of how national NCOIL is, and the experiences and the relationships you can build with folks from all across the country. And an added benefit too is those numbers that I mentioned, when you compare those to other conferences, like perhaps NCSL or NAIC, they're attended by thousands of people. So large groups like that are great, but when you come to NCOIL with a little bit of a smaller setting, things are a little bit more intimate, and you're able to have more meetings and more quickly develop some relationships with other legislators and other interested parties. Next slide, please. And so these are just some of the current issues that NCOIL is working on, as well as some of the recent issues that we just wrapped up. I won't go through each of these. I'll just mention a couple that I think are important, especially to folks here in Wyoming. We're working on a model law right now that has to do with insurers' use of aerial images in making coverage and claims determinations. And there's been a lot of stories in several states where folks have submitted complaints to insurance departments saying, well, my homeowner's policy was canceled, and it was based on this image taken from either a drone or some sort of other aircraft. But the problem is that those images were either severely outdated or they were simply wrong. It was a picture of the wrong house. So what some states have done is they've stepped up and they've tried to set forth some guardrails, not to prohibit insurers from using that sort of technology. No one wants to, prohibit innovation in that regard, but there should be some sort of framework where if a homeowner's policy is canceled or non-renewed based on an aerial image that is inaccurate, then that homeowner should have some sort of recourse to be able to go through a process and say, well, I can show you that the image that you based your determination on is wrong. I can provide proof of that, and there should be some sort of process set up there. So we're working on that. That should be adopted at some point throughout this year. And then mitigation, that's an issue I'm sure you're very familiar with, especially with all the unfortunate weather events that California and other states have been experiencing. So we just developed a model law that tracks a growing trend that several states have been following, which has to do with insurance departments are setting up grant programs where homeowners can apply for a grant of about $10,000 to mostly focusing on strengthening and fortifying their roof to certain standards. And the standards are based on an organization called the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And if you meet those standards, then on the back end, the insurer is then required to issue you a premium discount. So it's kind of a win-win for the insurers, the policy holders, and the state as well, that their citizens are strengthening their homes. So when they do experience these natural disasters, you're not seeing these roofs come off or just being severely damaged beyond repair. And so what I'd like to do now is, if you can just go to the next slide, please, just spend a couple minutes on kind of just a little bit of the history of insurance in our state-based system, just to kind of show you how we got here today. So the insurance is one of the kind of the rare industries that is largely regulated at the state level still. And the way this came about was there was a Supreme Court case called Paul v. Virginia in 1869 that said insurance is not commerce, so it wasn't subject to federal regulation under the Commerce Clause, which frankly kind of strains logic a little bit. But fast forward to about 1944, there was another Supreme Court case which did say it was commerce and therefore was subject to federal law. But if you look at the timing there, about 1944, the country was dealing with a lot of things right there at that time. So Congress said, well, we don't think we can respond to the Supreme Court decision and develop a huge federal framework to govern the insurance industry. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which says, unless Congress states otherwise, insurance shall be regulated by the states. Now, you may be thinking, well, what about things like, the Affordable Care Act and the federal government's involvement there? So it's important to note that Congress still can step in anytime it wants and regulate insurance. But where you run into issues is if Congress hasn't enacted a law related to insurance, then that is the state's province pursuant to the McCarran-Ferguson Act. So that's when you hear about if states are pushing back on federal encroachment of insurance, it's in instances where Congress hasn't acted with a law related to insurance, but federal agencies might be acting on their own volition, implementing regulations related to insurance without statutory authorization. And that's an instance where that would be in violation of the McCarran-Ferguson Act. So next slide. And so that brings us to where we are today, which, like I said, the state-based system, for the most part, regulates mostly everything. Insurer formation, financing, investment, taxation, and you also have an organization. I'm sure some of you have heard of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC. It's a great organization. But they're a regulatory organization, as the name indicates, comprised of insurance commissioners and their staffs. And they also develop model laws and model regulations. But we work very closely together to kind of, as best we can, ensure that NCOIL, as an organization comprised of legislators, tries to develop model laws, and the NAIC, comprised of regulators, kind of deals with model regulations. And that balance has worked well. We work very, very well, very closely with the NAIC. At each of our national meetings, actually, we have something called an NCOIL NAIC dialogue, where the participating commissioners engage in a dialogue with our member legislators on kind of issues that their states are experiencing. And next slide, please. And this is just one last example that we think is really interesting, and I guess you'll be the judge of that. But this relates to ERISA, which I'm sure you've dealt with in your respective time in the legislature. So ERISA, it preempts state laws that try and govern self-insured plans. But the problem here is that ERISA, it's grown far beyond its original intent, and what we think is an example of unnecessary and unlawful federal intrusion on the state-based system of insurance, because ERISA was enacted in the 1970s as a pension reform law. And if you look at the statistics, in the 1970s, about 7% of people had insurance through self-funded plans. Now, if you look at fast forward to 2019, that number is ballooned to 61%. We have reason to believe that's grown higher since 2019. And the problem there is that when legislatures like yourselves try to enact a piece of healthcare policy, so let's just say if you wanted to enact a health insurance mandate, because that's just an easy example, the problem is that that piece of policy is really only impacting a sliver of your state's population, because almost 2/3 of it is governed by ERISA. So which we think and our members think is a problem. And what we've advocated for is actually a waiver process, which is similar to what other federal statutes have, like the Affordable Care Act, where states can apply to federal agencies for a waiver from certain federal laws to have policy that those legislatures enact apply to a whole state's citizenry. And we've had conversations recently with Congressman Sessions, and he is planning on introducing that in an upcoming session of Congress. And the last slide is just some examples of other recent intrusion by the federal agencies. And I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions, but I'll just close by saying we really do encourage more Wyoming participation. We really think it will benefit yourselves and our members by hearing from your perspectives and from you hearing from our members' perspectives. So happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much. And any questions from the committee for Mr. Melifchik? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Just real quickly, gentlemen, appreciate you being here. It feels like to me insurance is going to percolate to the top of the barrel in terms of public policy out across. Are you sensing that and hearing that with all the catastrophes going on, all of the situations that we're running into with wildfires and hurricanes, flooding in Kentucky? It seems like this is going to be one of the big policy concerns going forward. Are you seeing that too?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the question. And we are, which is, it's fortunate for us because it keeps our organization, busy and responsive to what the issues are. But it's unfortunate because, when you start seeing insurance on the front page of outlets like the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, then it's a very big issue. Usually insurance is reserved for smaller insurance-focused outlets, but we are seeing it come to the top of people's mind with unfortunate things like hurricanes and the recent wildfires in California. I understand you'll be dealing with a piece of legislation later this week that deals with insurance coverage in wildfires. But it's something that we're mindful of and we are continuing to discuss. And in fact, just last week, our Property and Casualty Committee held an interim meeting where we heard from a panel of experts that are trying to develop some solutions that states can enact that kind of better prepares their state and their citizens for when these types of weather events unfortunately will happen again in the future.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senator Duckstader.
Mr. Chairman, you go into a state, you make sure you hold, for example, you talk about coming to Wyoming and maybe you'd hold an event here. How do our legislators walk away from something like that? How do you know they're better informed? I mean, it's not just an outing, it's not just it's something different. How do they really understand the insurance industry after working with you?
Go ahead.
So thank you for the question. It's a great question. So, well, ultimately, we're judged by the product that we put forth. So that's on us to put forth an interesting agenda, interesting topics to discuss, qualified speakers for the legislators to hear from. And what's important is that I probably didn't stress enough is that NCOIL is, we're a bipartisan organization. So what that means is not only amongst our legislative membership, where we're bipartisan, but when we have panels and we have interested parties in to discuss things, you're hearing from both sides. So you're not just hearing from one side of what they want legislation to be. You're hearing from consumer advocates and anyone that has a stake in an issue as to what good public policy is. And ultimately, a sign of as if legislators are really understanding things, understanding the market, is one sign is if they will come back to meetings. And that is tough with things such as term limits in several states. But we think as long as we continue to put on strong agendas with qualified speakers, then you'll come to our meetings and not only listen to experts, but you'll also develop relationships with other legislators and other interested parties. So when you leave, if you have a question on a piece of legislation, whether it's one that your colleague brought forth or something that you're trying to develop, you can call us, you can call those people that you met at NCOIL to kind of get their feedback and run ideas off of.
Anybody else? Well, thank you so much. I will put in a plug. I think Jackson Hole, I'm not part of their tourism board, but I think they would tell you that they can handle very large meetings, 1,000 people meetings, and they have the best airports in the state of Wyoming with connecting flights everywhere. So don't give up on the national meeting in Jackson Hole, but regional meeting's good too. And I'm so grateful that you came out in the middle of a snowstorm, and I look forward to talking to you maybe later today. What time do you have to leave? You have to hit the road this afternoon, right?
Yeah, I think we're scheduled to leave around 3.
Okay. Well, maybe we can touch base after you see what kind of reception you get with our good friends in the House. And we're so glad you both came. Thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, everybody, we will pick back up. The next one is House Bill 156, proof of voter residency, registration qualifications. And Representative Bear, welcome. We're glad you're here. And you're all by yourself, but there's a lot of names on this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here in front of your committee and presenting this bill. And I'll get right to it if you'd like.
Please do.
Mr. Chairman and Corporations Committee, this is a bill that really solves a couple of small issues. And I think that it's pretty clear that these issues are important and that are very much supported by the people of Wyoming, that this is a concern that we should take care of. People really want to make sure that only Wyoming residents vote in Wyoming. That's really the point of this bill. We don't require proof of residency at this point. We require residency, but no proof of that residency. So that's what this bill addresses. And it also adds another feature of setting a limit as to where we're going to determine the length of that residency should be to be qualified as a resident. We had an avenue to take care of this. And last year, the Secretary of State was attempting to create a rule. And I got involved then because my constituents really wanted to see this take place where we're limiting to only Wyoming residents voting in Wyoming. And so I got involved in there and made a statement on behalf of my constituents in that rulemaking process, but it was disappointed that the chief executive vetoed that. And his statement in his veto letter said that It was because of a lack of statutory authority for the Secretary of State, and this bill addresses that issue. So with that, I'll get into the bill. This bill is going to require a qualified elector be a bona fide resident of the state of Wyoming for not less than 30 days. That's that limit that we're putting in here. And it also requires documentation proving residency as the voter registers. So the first part of the bill gets into this 1816-102, which is an interesting place to be in statute because most of our election statutes are in 22, but it happens to address resort districts. And maybe that's something I'll come back later and try to get that brought into 22 at some point. But right now it doesn't. So we go into 1816-102 and we add this language on page 2, line 20, has been a bona fide resident of Wyoming for not less than 30 days before the date of election at which he offers to vote. And then we go ahead and get into 22 on page 3. We go to the attestation that was actually just testified to in your last bill, and we add that language there, has been a bona fide resident of Wyoming for not less than 30 days before the date of the election at which he offers to vote. And then you can see in Romanet 27, we talk about the residence. On page 4, we add that same language. We say proof of residence. Now we're getting into the proof part of it. Means the documents or other proof of residence specified by rule of the Secretary of State, which rule identifies documents or other proof that establishes residency. Now, why don't we just make a list of those documents? And the reason we're not doing that in this residency bill is because we want to have flexibility. I think we've seen just in some bills this session that there's a lot of things changing when it comes to identification and how people should prove that. And there was a pretty robust process for that rulemaking that was gone through and a lot of testimony from the public as to how we should address these requirements for residency. So we're giving that authority that the governor said wasn't there to the Secretary of State for future rulemaking in this area. Then in 22-3-102.
Hold on, Representatives, Senator Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along those lines, do you happen to remember, maybe this is a question for the Secretary, in that rulemaking, you just give us some examples of the proof of residence, what those were? I assume that was in the rule that didn't quite make it past the governor. Can you give us examples of what the proof of residence was? And maybe that's a question for the Secretary later.
Representative Bear, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Boner. I will defer to the Secretary for specifics, but there was a list, and it was expanded, actually, I believe, based on testimony from the public. So that flexibility to make those changes based on what the clerks are seeing, what the public is seeing when they're registering to vote, I think is important, and that's why this bill doesn't put those constraints of just a list of identification. But I'll let the Secretary of State address what the final outcome of that rulemaking process was for you.
We good? Keep going, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can see at the bottom of page 4, we add that the county clerk shall not register a person if the person's presented identification or proof of residence contains any indication that the person is not a citizen of the United States unless the person also presents proof of citizenship as specified by rule of the Secretary of State. We can see over here on page 5 that they are a bona fide resident of Wyoming, not less than 30 days. And then we get into 103, furnishing the oath, and the proof of residency is added to 22-1-102. In the oath on page 6, we add the language, I have resided in the state for not less than 30 days before the date of the election. Moving on to page 7, we get into the absentee registration generally and how it's dealt with when they're registering for absentee. And we add the proof of residency on line 8. And then on page 8, we again make conforming language. And then in definitions on 22-29-104. And then finally on page 9, we see has been a bona fide resident of Wyoming for not less than 30 days before the date of the election, which he offers to vote. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, we have an effective date of July 1st of this year.
Thank you, Representative.
And with that, I'd happy to stand for questions.
Yeah, let's see. Any questions for Representative Bear? Any questions? So I might have a couple. I'm looking at the language online, on page 4, bottom of the page, and I'm feeling this is a little bit circular, but help me out. It says, the county, he is a citizen of the United States, and then the new language, the county clerk shall not register a person if the person's presented identification or proof of residency contains any indication that the person is not a citizen of the United States, unless the person also presents proof of citizenship as specified by rule of the Secretary of State. I guess it works.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
It
if I
seems
may.
kind of torturous, but yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there's a suggestion there to make that a little simpler, straightforward, but the idea is that, once you have that identification, if it had that indication, but then subsequently they had obtained citizenship or gotten, that corrected in another way, we'd want to be able to accommodate someone who can definitely prove that they're a citizen, even though one identification might indicate otherwise.
That's right. And current law does require them to be a citizen of the United States to be registered to vote.
Yes, sir. And much like this residency issue, the issue is the proof is not, we're not requiring proof of that citizenship. So there's an issue there as well. And I think, I have a bill that is hopefully coming to you that addresses that. And I think Senator Beitman also has a bill that addresses that issue that's already passed through your body.
Right. Fair enough. Anybody else? So the other question I might have is, what happens in federal elections? Do we have, are we allowed to use the 30 days for our federal delegation? And then on top of that, I would add, what if it's a presidential year? And then someone is voting for president? Is that different? To you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the questions. Excellent question. And we've had that discussion on the House side as well. And so there's a couple of caveats there. The current law requires that if there's a residency issue, you're going to go back to your previous state to vote. And all of the states also have that responsibility, including Wyoming, to take care of those people who have left the state and are not yet qualified to vote in another state. And that's how we address those presidential elections and those federal elections, to ensure that those people are not disenfranchised.
Fair
So
enough.
this type of language is becoming more and more common across the states.
So in essence, the solution, the presidency, it doesn't matter where you vote for president. It might matter in terms of electoral votes. It might matter at some level, but in general, you're not disenfranchised for the office of presidency.
Yes,
But if you were to come to Wyoming from Colorado, for example, the solution is that you would have to vote in Colorado for Colorado members of Congress, and that's the way it works.
Yes, sir. That is accurate.
Okay. Anybody else? Senator Dockstader.
Mr. Chairman, on the section page 4 where you were bringing up that question, let's ask the sponsor if we could, if you went to, Representative, if you went to lines, 17 through 2 of the next page, what if you just simply said the county clerk shall not register a person unless there is proof of residency in the United States as specified by the rule of the Secretary of State? Would that work for you?
Mr. Chairman,
Bear.
Senator Dockstader, in general, I think it's workable that way. You changed the language to residency versus this is citizenship.
This is
As long as you were-
both, actually, but yeah.
As long as you're careful to have both, I think that language could probably be a little clearer. And I'm always for, making sure the language is clear in statute. So I would, I'd want to see that written out, but it sounds very amiable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Fair enough. Anything else? All right. Who else would like to testify on this bill? Mr. Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Stay by.
Well, the first thing we're going to do, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence,
Is your mic on, Mr. Secretary? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Great.
we have copies of the rule we did last year. I think we're just going to hand out a copy of each
You
member,
bet.
if you don't mind.
You bet.
And I think Joe worked that out with Ms. Sharp as I begin. Mr. Chairman, I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and to my left is Joe Rubino, our General Counsel, and then also our Chief Policy Director. I stand in support of House Bill 156, proof of voter residency. I want to thank Representative Bear for bringing this bill. And I want to be clear that Wyomingites and only Wyomingites should be allowed to vote in Wyoming elections, period. And I think we can all agree on that. This bill takes that issue head on, at least the residency in its current form head on, and ensuring that we have a legislative vehicle to bring the election integrity work that we've been working on for many months, as you can see from that packet, to fruition. Now, starting out, as we begin these comments, you know, my staff got me a Christmas gift, and it's a plaque that's on my desk, and it says, it's a saying I have, election integrity is more than just an attestation. And it's really where we're trying to take the election integrity space in Title 22, where it's not just going to be somebody swearing on a form that they meet the qualifications to be an elector, that they're a qualified elector, but that we're going to have this proof of residency, proof of citizenship, these upfront measures to ensure that these attestations are indeed correct. And that's what we're trying to do here. As it currently stands, Wyoming does not require documentary proof of Wyoming residency to register to vote. In February of last year, our office adopted amendments to Chapter 2 of our election procedures to require proof of Wyoming residency when registering to vote, as well as clarity, ensuring illegal aliens could not vote. And that's the language in page 4, where non-resident designations on licenses, hopefully soon with the bill that went through the Senate and is proceeding through the House, that'll be even stronger in that it'll say non-citizen designations on licenses, that is not allowed for registering to vote. In the past, that has not been in the SOS's procedures. The clerks have said they train on that, but it's not clear to us whether we have uniformity across the state on non-resident designations on licenses not being eligible for registering to vote. So that's why we put that in our rule, because the registration process has always been in the rules of the SOS. And it's one of the reasons why the governor's analysis that we weren't statutorily authorized to do this, we don't agree with. But that being said, here we are in February of 25, and we're trying to bring through a bill. These rules were the product of months of collaboration with Wyoming's 23 county clerks and other stakeholders. These rules were well vetted and received overwhelming support from members of the public. I remember Chairman Case was at our rulemaking hearing, and I'll never forget your comment. You said that the legislative process is better, and I love that comment because, you know, I've seen it from both sides. There are strengths and weaknesses to both, but being on the executive branch side, I've learned a lot about the rulemaking process, and there is a place for it, as I know you've acknowledged as well. But I think our rule was really buttoned up. It was strong, and it was really unfortunate when the governor vetoed it on April 12th. He claimed the rules were beyond the authority delegated to our office. I don't agree with the analysis. That being said, again, here we are in February 2025, and we just want to make it clear in the statute and move forward. This bill provides explicit rulemaking authority to ensure Wyomingites and only Wyomingites can vote in Wyoming elections, and to fulfill the mandate in the Wyoming Constitution and Wyoming law that those who register to vote are indeed residents of the state of Wyoming. I also want to speak to the explicit language in 22-3-102, which ensures that a county clerk shall not register a person if the person's presented identification or proof of residence contains any indication that the person is not a citizen of the United States. And that was also in the rule. We spoke to it earlier. Now, we have proof of citizenship that there's a clean vehicle that has not been referred from the president's desk at this point, House Bill 157. There's also another vehicle that has other stuff in there, Senate File 190. I don't think this provision is duplicative of proof of citizenship ultimately. It might be slightly duplicative, but it's not in conflict if proof of citizenship ultimately passes. That being said, I really like the idea Senator Dockstetter seemed to be going towards of just amending the proof of citizenship into this bill, getting one vehicle for proof of residency and citizenship. You think about the registration process, there's kind of three boxes, right? Proof of identity, which we already do. That's in our rules, and that's one of the reasons, too, why we don't agree with the governor's analysis. But the two we're trying to add is proof of residency and proof of citizenship. And there's arguments to do it in two vehicles, but where we're at with 2 weeks to go in the session, I think it'd be beautiful, especially because this this provision on page 4 might be might be a little bit duplicative if proof of citizenship passes, to just amend it into here. And we could go ahead and draft that up if you want us to, or work with you on that. I think that's a great idea, where Senator Dockstader was going to on that. Now, switching gears here a little bit, let's move into the durational residency conversation.
Very good.
We're very supportive of durational residency. Chairman Case knows we've had since that first meeting in my time as SOS in April of 23 and Lander, we asked the committee to draft a durational residency requirement. I know we have aficionados of the Wyoming Constitution on the committee. As you know, we had a 1-year residency requirement in our state constitution. And 48 states actually had this. Some states had 2-year residency requirements. It's actually really interesting, the history on that, why. But they were thrown out in a series of cases in the 1970s. 27 states have acted to put in place a durational residency requirement and statute which could survive constitutional scrutiny. The longest that has been able to survive is 30 days. I'd like it to be stronger, but that's where we're at. And right now, we're not in that batch of 27, and statute is silent on it. So if somebody was here 10 seconds and could meet the other provisions of registering to vote, there is a strong argument that that is an eligible registration. And that's really why we need to put some durational aspect into the statute. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, I know it's frowned upon to get up twice, and I already saw some of the conversation on the federal stuff on you have it. You've heard us. We've had a lot of conversations. The bottom line on federal law is that if somebody doesn't meet the 30 days, they can vote in their original state. So if they moved here from, your example was Colorado, and they didn't meet the 30 days, they could vote in presidential federal races, president and vice president it is, I believe, in the original state. And if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Rubino with a little more color. We would prefer to just keep it so that they go back to the original state, which is in alignment with federal law, and we're very confident with that, rather than, and that's why in our statute, we also say, if you have the intent to return, you can vote in Wyoming. That's to be in alignment once you've established the nexus. But that's why we think that you just keep it, we just keep it clean. And if they haven't reached the 30 days, then they vote on federal races in their original state.
And Mr. Secretary, just want to dialogue with you for a second. So that would be clean and an alternative, because I think the committee went down the road before of having an exception in the law for presidential elections, right? Is that what you don't want us to go down that road again, is what you're suggesting, if I read it right, correct?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you making me explicit. Yes, I would prefer you guys not go down that route again. And that's where we went in where the committee went in the 23 interim. And it's not clean. It creates some implementation issues. And we really believe that it's in alignment with federal law. There are other states that do it that have not been challenged. Mr. Rubino has, I think, maybe 3 to 5 minutes on that, or do you want to go down that road on why we feel it's in alignment with federal law to just keep it clean?
It's your choice, sir.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rubino, I think, could maybe speak to that a little bit.
We bet we want to hear it. Hi, Mr. Rubino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Rubino, I'm the Policy Director and Counsel with the Secretary of State's office. Yeah, I just wanted to speak briefly. And Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, Senator Boner, you've heard this. We spoke to it in at least 2 interim committee meetings during the 2023 interim in the consideration of what became House Bill 38 from the 2024 budget session, with the durational residency requirement, and squaring both the Voting Rights Act, what states have done, with the Supreme Court cases that have generally upheld the Voting Rights Act. And so, Mr. Chairman, I could briefly run through it if that's all right, just why we, as we testified before, do not believe that an exception is necessary, and why the onus really is on the state from which they've moved if they cannot meet the durational residency requirements of the state to which they are moving.
How about if we poll the committee a little bit?
Sure.
Because I'm kind of persuaded by your argument. Okay. But the issue before is we actually crafted a bill with an exception that said that you could go to the county clerk and you could vote for the cast a presidential election ballot. And I'm pretty sure that that was Senator Scott's suggestion at that time. He worked pretty hard at it. That's got some problems in the sense that, for one thing, your anonymity of your ballot might be a bit more compromised because you're only one that's doing that. But there may be other issues with that. Does anybody want to have Mr. Rubino maybe give us exquisite background on that? I'm not detecting it, so.
Yeah, thank you,
I think
Mr. Chair.
you're carrying the day on.
Yeah,
this issue.
and we don't want to talk further when we're carrying the day. So we're
Okay.
good, Mr. Chairman. So we're very in support of the durational requirement. We're very in support of proof of residency, in support of the bill. And we would agree with amending proof of citizenship in so we don't have this duplicative provision on page 4. We could try to type that up here and probably would be in the afternoon for the after adjournment, or we could try to do it on the floor, or maybe you've already prepared it. But I'm very supportive of that and would like to work with Senator Dockstetter on that approach if he's interested.
Well, he's the word man, and I think he's already maybe got something going.
Okay, great.
We'll see. Any other questions for Mr. Secretary, Mr. Rubino? Thanks, you guys. Stay close. How about our county clerks? Ms. Langford, Ms. Murphy, welcome.
Good morning again.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman and committee, I'm Mary Langford and I have the honor of representing the county clerks. Today I have with me to my right the Honorable Mo Murphy. She's a Teton County clerk and we're going to talk to you about residency. The County Clerks Association agrees that all voters in Wyoming should be citizens and residents of Wyoming to participate in our elections. The clerks are able to administer these elections, but we do have some concerns that you've already heard from the Secretary of State's office, and we'd like to visit about those just a little bit as well.
Go ahead.
This bill is, as you remember, similar to the 2023 House Bill 38, Voter Qualifications Durational Residency Requirement Bill that was produced in the 23 interim, which we all attended, or most of us did. And it passed the House corporations, but it wasn't considered by the Senate in 24. We still struggle some with the bona fide resident definition and what that is in this bill as well, but it seems that we're rounding into it being a 30-day person as opposed to being something else. So 30 days would be a bona fide resident. The documents, the proof is in this whole bill is going to be in the rules. The documents that are required to prove residence will be determined by the Secretary of State's office. And some of these documents that we've noted in the rules that were proposed earlier, that documents that have photos, some of them don't have photos. Photos have been an issue for proving ID for voters as well as doing voter registration. So bringing up photos just for your, to note. Rules should be reasonable and they should be inclusive. And one of the questions that we had about the rules originally was can all citizens produce the documents, particularly the non-traditional population of residents, being homeless, transient, seniors, missionaries, and young adults. Can they all produce some of those documents to be able to prove their residency? We appreciate the moving the path from the one that was going down the path that we were going to have separate presidential and vice presidential ballots for those folks that didn't qualify to sending them back to their state of residence before. That's a pleasing option for the clerks to be able to administer as opposed to deal with the other, because we would be looking at another set of ballots, another set of tabulation, and trying to maintain that and to preserve those votes as well, and to make sure that they stayed confidential. So that's that. Finally, all qualified electors have the right to vote, and the Secretary of State's rules should be inclusive for all residents so that they're able to prove their residency if they are a resident. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think Mo might have something that she'd like to say. And we have some, I mean, the topic still does come back to the fact that we have some issues with trying to prove our residents, those of us that live out in the Netherlands that have post office boxes on our driver's license and those kinds of things, but.
Let's hear from Clerk Murphy, and then we'll take questions for both of them. Clerk Murphy,
Thanks,
welcome.
Mr. Chairman. I do not have much to add to Mary's testimony, but I do appreciate the Secretary of State's, when he was creating the rules during the interim year, that he did take into account that my county has 16,000 people with only PO boxes on their license, and we only have 15,000 registered voters. So that, including myself, I only have a PO box. So I did appreciate greatly that he took that into account. So I don't have much to add. It's available for questions.
Okay, anybody? Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Clerk Murphy, we had a really good friend who spent time last year in your county. She was a rock climber and a guide and worked in your community throughout the summer months, probably 5 or 6 months. I'm just curious, would she, since she was, sorry to say, living out of her car, so in that situation, would she have had any difficulty registering to vote in Teton County? Would a driver's license be enough for a good old resident of Wyoming?
If she had a Wyoming.
I'm just
Murphy.
curious,
Sorry.
how do you handle people like her that are in your community?
Clerk Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, we do have a homeless population, and they will come in and register to vote if they have their ID. We will register them at the courthouse.
And
How do you register? Mr.
Back to you.
Chairman, how do you register them? Are they able to provide what you need, most of them? Is this going to in any way keep somebody who is there working in the hospitality industry, living, not in a permanent place, not leasing an apartment? Are we going to keep somebody from voting here?
Ms. Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, that will be up to the rules. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Senator Steinmetz. Were you done? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just reading the rules, and it looks like if she had a fishing license, she could prove residency from the previous rules that they did. Is that correct? I mean, she could live in her car and get a fishing license in Teton County and register to vote.
Ms. Murphy, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, I believe so. I don't have the rules in front of me. I apologize. Ms. Langford might be able
Ms.
to.
Langford.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, let me tell you, when the rules came out, I'm one of those type of people that took the rules and laid them down on my kitchen table and went looking for my proofs of residency. Because I've been a resident of the state of Wyoming since 1960, which is a long time. And I voted in the state of Wyoming my entire life. And I voted in 3 different counties also, but I voted in Sublette County the most.
Not at one time you voted.
So as I pull out my proofs of residency, I got concerned because I've lived here forever, and I've voted forever. You look at a passport, it doesn't show your residency, it shows where you were born. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't born in Wyoming, but I got here as fast as I could. But you go looking through some of those proofs of residency, and it's difficult, truly. My bank statement does not have my name on it. It has my husband's name on it. My power bill does not have my name on it. My husband's name is on it because he signed up for the power back in 1980 when we moved to town, and it stayed that way. So there's a number of those documents that we've had listed that would not prove up for me. Thank God that the treasurer in Sublette County puts our residence address on our registrations for our vehicles. Now, I don't feel real comfortable with that being a great credential for me to be able to prove my residency, but I did get an elk license last year, and it had my residence address on it. But those are the kinds of things that concern me, that I'm an old lady and I've lived here a long time, and it's going to be hard for me to prove up. And that's the reason why we need to be inclusive with these rules. I think we can get there. I think we can get enough stuff in the list to get people registered, or to get their residency proved. But in a case like this, we do have folks that are living homelessly. They're camping here and there or whatever around our state. They're staying in Wyoming. They're not coming in and out probably. But I think we need to be cognizant that there are going to be those folks that it's going to be hard to do. And particularly even young adults that think about your kids that might be living with you for a while after they got out of college. They are going to have a hard time proving their residency because they don't have a power bill. They don't have a rental agreement. They don't own property. There was property documents. What if your property's owned by a corporation? What if your mortgage is to a corporation that you have, doesn't have your name on it? So there's a lot of, it's going to be a bit of a job to figure that out, but it's doable. And I think that we can get enough documents there to be able to prove residency, to make it easy for the clerks.
Anybody else? I wonder, we have some people in our society that are extremely unfortunate. We know who they are, but they may not have any of this proof. They're still entitled to vote. How do you think we should handle them?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we've looked at a couple of other things as far as to prove identity. And there may be, and I know that the secretary doesn't like attestations, that he wants to get away from those kinds of things, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe it ends up being a situation where somebody attests for someone else, where there's a document where the story that you hear that's the more prevalent is the fact where you put your elderly parent into a nursing home and they actually don't have any documentation because you as their child has signed the contract for their home and those kinds of things. We have the Wyoming ID that you can get that's free, but that's not always easy to get there, to get that photo ID and, those kinds of things. But I think that there might be, that we need a catch-all. We need your last source or your last resource available, we need to have that in that list. But I am not so sure that we can't find that.
Okay. Anything else from the committee? Just want to telegraph, this will be the last bill we take up. We're going to come back upon adjournment. So if you're around for other bills, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just looking at the list. So, I think we could tweak these. There's one for the residential care facility. It's a contract or intake document for those facilities that was included in the previous list. And then there was one from, a communication or letterhead from a public or private or social services agency for folks that are down on their luck and homeless and things like that. So there were a couple things maybe we could tweak on that.
Thank you, Senator. Anything else from you guys? Let's take more public testimony. Let's fill out these chairs here. The intention of the committee would be to go till 10 minutes to the hour. And then we're going to have to just come back upon adjournment. So let's fill out this chair. Ms. Moline, thank you. Shall we start with Mr. Correnthi? How are you today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a long time. Glad to be back. Joey Correnthi, Rural Wyoming Matters. I think the bill is a good first step. Lots of things that need to be looked at and maybe worked on in future years, maybe a little bit on the floor. But the one thing that I see as a gap is something that was mentioned earlier. Let's call it less than adequately homed persons. It's not so much how do they prove they are who they are. Was testified earlier that they get registered at the courthouse. Well, the courthouse is a very specific location within a specific precinct, within a specific split. So if they're registered at the courthouse, let's take my county, for example, but they live on the other side of another valley, what ballot do you issue them? These questions aren't answered by this bill, and I don't know that the bill's made to contemplate that, but the ideas for the future, well, we do need answers, because right now, as statute stands, the clerks are put in a position where if they register someone in that manner to make sure that they're able to vote, because they're an American citizen, they just can't prove it, or they're transient, they're breaking the law. They're receiving and processing registration without they know that that's not their address, and it's specifically stated in statute, they can't process that. But there's also the other statute that says that it's a member of the electorate. That person has the right to vote, and so you're breaking the law if you don't. So I think this is a good step to establish a baseline for all the other issues, and then some of these kind of marginalized peripheral ones really do need to be addressed because it puts the optics of the good work of our clerks at risk. And really, when it comes down to it, I don't know if just to fix a small problem, I want somebody who physically lives in a vehicle over here and is registered over here voting for school district or the mayor of this town because the physical address where they're registered is in a different split. On and for the bill, but I don't think we're done with this issue if this bill does go through. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Mr. Corinth? Thank you very much. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Chairman Case. Members of the committee, my name is Misty Zimmerman. I'm the program manager for Wyoming Driver Services. I just wanted to add a few comments based on both the testimony in the House side as well as the testimony here today. It is true that there are some of our credentials, our driver license ID cards that do strictly have PO boxes on them. However, I just want to communicate to the committee as well as the citizens that we do require proof of physical address when you get your Wyoming driver's licenses or your driver's license. The instance where you would have a PO box and not that physical address is if the person doesn't get mail at their physical address in some of our Star Valley locations. If the physical address and the PO box are in the same location or in the same city and zip, they would both be on there. But it would only be the PO box if the PO box was located in a different city than the state. But again, the residential address is captured in our system and it is also passed along through our interface with the Secretary of State's office that is then passed out to the WyoReg system and subsequently e-poll books in those locations that utilize those.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Zimmerman? And then how about the non-driver's license ID? Is that the same situation?
Chairman Case, you are correct. So we also do collect temporary and permanent resident status, and that information is also passed nightly to the Secretary of State's office as well as a monthly format that we do an update at the end of it. So we have physical address, mailing address, and if you are a temporary or a permanent resident within the state of Wyoming or the U.S. for lawful presence.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill. I think a lot of the issues that have been brought up, at least in my mind, I think we can deal with them in rules. We've done that before. And I think we can take these instances, work them into the rules and come up with a good set of rules. And with that, sitting in support of this bill, Mr. Chairman, I'd take any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Moline? Not seeing any, Mr. Moline. Ms. Herman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Pull that down. Those things have got to be kind of pointed right at your mouth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Marguerite Herman. I'm here for the League of Women Voters. In opposition to this bill, I will just say that the whole search, the search for what bona fide resident means was started, I believe, by the county clerk in Fremont County, who was very concerned that this was part of the law, but there was no way to, or no directions on how to ascertain that and confirm it. And I would have to say this is an attempt to do that. I don't think you're there yet. And I would suggest that this actually go to a interim kind of, it just needs more work. I think it needs the committee kind of a consultation and research and testimony and gather it. What state residency, if you have a driver's license, as you just heard, you're fine. It means that you have somehow proved to the Department of Transportation that indeed you reside in the state, but having a residence, a specific place. We're a very transient society. We move around a lot. There are people who are living with a relative. They don't have any documentation. They have their word, and they're just. We've heard lots of information about why you might not have the documentation that would somehow prove that you are not just a resident of Wyoming, but you have a physical place and to name that place. That's kind of a problem that still needs more work, I think, than what time we have here in this bill. The durational thing also is kind of problematic. So if I register 30 days before an election, and I can produce a bill, something with my name on it that shows, or that I am now in Wyoming, what's to say that I don't then leave the state for a cruise around the world and come back on election day? Am I a bona fide resident because I was here 30 days ago and registered? It's problematic, and 30 days seems to be somewhat arbitrary. It's simply a time limit that works for some states. Why does it work for us? I think we need a little more explanation or rationale than simply it exists out there and some states choose to do it. 2 weeks, 29 days, 31 days, it just seems arbitrary, and I think we need a little more work on that. And again, getting back to what is a bona fide resident? And I know that in the House, there were attempts to say, well, for people who have vacation homes here, well, we're here for, 4 months of the year or whatever. And so for people who have two residents, are you a bona fide resident if you're if you own property and for most of the year you rent it out as an Airbnb? So the term we still have work to do, I think, to say what a bona fide resident is. It's more than a utility bill, I think. Again, if you have a driver's license, I think that settles that you are a resident and there's a date on there. And I will just say, I was stopped recently by the good police in Cheyenne for a traffic issue, and the policeman looked at my ID and my Wyoming driver's license and said, is this correct? Is this a correct address? Because people do not go change their addresses. So even that can't be nailed down. You're supposed to renew every 4 years. So I would just suggest that this is a start. It's a good start. But I think the durational piece needs a little more work, and I think how to define bona fide needs more work as well. This kind of gets around it, but I think it leaves a lot of people, eligible voters, out in the cold. And so I would suggest this is not, as they say, ready for prime time.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Questions for Ms. Herman? Thank you. I think Ms. Burt was next, or I can't remember who sat down next. Okay, Ms. Russell. It doesn't matter to me, but it might matter to you guys. Go ahead, Ms. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy Russell, Wyoming Republican Party. We stand in support of this bill. Ms. Herman, the previous testifier, rightly identified that this is not a good fix, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And this bill has been studied, and this issue has been studied to death. And so we've heard not ready for prime time over and over and over. Let's make a step forward. She brought up a very good point that there are ways to identify yourself. You have a utility bill, a bank receipt, a bank statement, insurance policy, telephone bill, mortgage document, et cetera, vehicle registration. Referring back to previous testimony that I gave, another example of ballot issues is a couple called me who live partly, their ranch is part in Wyoming, part in Montana. Their nephew lives with them. He received 3 ballots. The reason he received 3 ballots is that the 3 registrations involved either a different address or a different way the name was stated. That is not uncommon. And so again, I'm going to go back to the idea that, yes, the clerks can see the statewide registration. What they can't see, I believe, and this could be asked, is what happened to assure what was behind that verification of registration for that clerk. I don't believe the clerks can see that documentation that was relied on for certification. We have had talk about blockchain to use in registrations and voting. My understanding from the best explanation I've seen of blockchain is with IBM, that every step of the way in the verification is done by committee and verified. What we are lacking overall is verification and chain of custody in our election integrity issues. This bill is definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Questions for Ms. Russell? Ms. Russell, the instance where someone received 3 ballots, in Wyoming, we don't mail out ballots unless it's in response to a request for absentee. So I I assume that the ballots were from different states, or were they multiple from Wyoming? It sounds irregular, and I wonder if you reported this instance.
It was irregular, Mr. Chairman, and in that particular case, the couple called me and said, what do I do? And I encouraged them to call, because it involved both states, I encouraged them to call the secretaries of state of both states to resolve the issue. And they said, thank you for that information. They were going to do that. This was several years ago.
And was it a Wyoming ballot that they received
I believe so.
without requesting one? Because you can't get one without requesting one. These instances where fraud is alleged, I have to come down on a little bit, so help me with that.
Mr. Chairman, I don't remember the particulars.
Okay,
What I remember was their concern and that I advised them to speak to their secretaries of state.
very good, thank you. Ms. Burt, we're not gonna be able to accommodate anybody else at the table. We're gonna pick this back up upon adjournment. So, Ms. Burt?
Yes, thank you. Linda Burt, Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And just very briefly, some of our clients and individuals may not have this information in terms of residency, or they may not be able to get it if they have it. It may not be available to them. So in these kinds of circumstances, these residency issues would be very difficult for them, and as far as their ability to vote and their ability to prove that they were residents of Wyoming.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Burt?
Briefly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kaufman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Case. I am absolutely for this bill, for the 30-day requirement. We need to do more. We need to do 6 months, maybe a year, but this is the first step that we can do, and that's up to you guys. And I appreciate you protecting our Wyoming vote. I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Kaufman? Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. So we will continue with public testimony. Nobody's going to get a second bite at the apple, but we'll take it up probably about 15 minutes upon final recess. We'll finish our agenda. And appreciate everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee. I know it's been a long day already. You're going to hate me later too, so.